Hello and welcome back to the Sharing Insights podcast. My name is Jason Bliss, and this is part 4 of my unexpected effort to produce a 6-part recap series that I publicly promised to make and began publishing before having the whole thing complete. It's been a humbling experience to keep up with all the fun stuff that producing a podcast brings. Interviewing a bunch of rebel back-to-the-landers was a pretty attractive introduction to the idea of starting a podcast and getting some good ideas out onto the airwaves. I've loved it, really, and I'm excited to release the other episodes I have edited and waiting for you. Doing these recap episodes, however, has been another kind of adventure. Don't get me wrong, it's been an invaluable practice for me to do the reviews. I feel like I'm getting out of the podcasting adventure the education that I was looking for. At the same time, creating audio content from a screen full of notes that you've taken from what other people have said is a lot more difficult than just speaking off the cuff or having a conversation. We humans are intrinsically a part of the planet in which we live, and we're as inseparable from it as we are intertwined with its other expressions of life forms that we coexist with. We're all composed of recycled molecules that we cyclically share with bacteria, viruses, other creatures, and even the soil itself. There are plenty of religions that tell the story of how we came from the soil, and to the soil we return. Yet we continue to tell ourselves and teach our children this egoic myth that leads people to think that we can somehow live healthfully independent from healthy soil, not to mention the life-enriching variety of other earth dwellers that we share it with. It's imperative for us to weave our inherent interconnection with the rest of our planet's existence back into our culture. We're all part of an organic planet, like the unimaginable number of different cells that we each need for our bodies to function properly. Our planet, our larger self, needs its cellular diversity to remain intact and cared for. Like us, when the planet loses significant parts of its functioning body, imbalances occur that can be much more difficult to return from than if things were already in a more relative state of balance. This episode is all about land management and what we've learned from those who've been doing the work and measuring the results. Building healthy soil is one of the most important things that any of us could be doing right now. I'm going to say it again. A healthy humanity depends on healthy soil. I'm going to be a little honest with you. I'm not the plant guy of the family. I enjoy planting things here and there, and I love preparing food from fresh harvest from the garden, but I'm generally not the guy you can rely on to keep a seedling alive long enough to transplant it or make sure the fertilization schedule stays current. This episode is a bit of a challenge for me to get into. I've had to shed a bit of my imposter syndrome to be talking to a bunch of plant enthusiasts about something that I know very little about compared to them. At the same time, that's the theme of this entire podcast. While I certainly have a fair share of things that I've learned and can teach newcomers to the farm, this has been my season to humble down, take notes, and be a student. So let's see what that's looked like. I've divided this episode into 3 sections. First, we'll talk about the planning stages of land management, followed by a recap of some of our guest soil building tips. Lastly, we'll wrap it up with some insights that they've learned from working with the plants themselves. Let's jump in. It all starts with a good design. Justin Dolan learned a valuable lesson about doing your due diligence and having your land surveyed. While he strongly recommends doing so before buying your property, it actually worked out to his advantage when he disputed his neighbor's practices of spraying herbicides too close to his roadside gardens. A little investigation taught him that what they both thought was the neighboring golf course's road was actually on his side of the property line. The circumstance drove the golf course developer toward unexpected production costs, leading them to sell the property to Justin at a low enough price that Justin was able to take it on and turn it on to what's become the country club's 18-hole permaculture disc golf course. In telling his story, Justin recommends that when negotiating your land price, you can often get the seller of your new property to share the costs of that assessment. Justin also recommends hiring someone to do a biodiversity study when buying it, to educate yourself on what you have living on your property. How cool would it be to have a customized bird-watching laminated card for you and your visitors to relate to your neighboring critters with? He says that a real country club should be taking care of the countryside. What a concept, right? Water management is a crucial element to focus on for any land project. Amidst that is to give sufficient focus on how we manage our wastewater. Justin's gray water and black water systems are built to bioremediate toxins. Bioremediation is a process where certain plants break down the molecular structure of certain toxins, transforming them into inert matter. The methods that he used make both economic and ecological sense. Some of the plants he uses include planting lana, hemp, fungus, and even puts oysters in to filter the water. He says that hemp is an ideal product to feed with these wastewaters. He also uses plastic bottles filled with biochar to filter out pathogens. Esteban Acosta was another guest who's put some significant thought into optimizing gray water and black water. His biodigester systems have been refined to a point where they produce cooking gas by fermenting the kitchen and bathroom waste produced from a small residential home. The price of gas keeps going up, folks. Investing in a design that can give you free fuel while creating garden fertilizer is an investment seriously worth considering, especially if you're still in the process of building or designing a new home. One thing that Justin expressed that stuck with me was that if you design your communal spaces to be beautiful, people want to protect and contribute to them. Justin has this infectious enthusiasm for using his property as a living seed bank. He encourages us to share and propagate as many different seeds as we can find. Like Nico Bodefer from Essence R&L, Justin encourages us to plant our houses by putting bamboo in the ground as early as possible. He boasts that it's like printing our own money. And seeing the price you can pay for some prepared bamboo canes in some places, I'd say he's right. Nico further reminds us to plant plenty of it and use it liberally in ways that the bamboo canes can be easily replaced. It's a renewable resource that can actually be fun to work with once you get the hang of it. At Finca La Isla, Peter Kring has designed his food forests in an impressively systematic way. His property is designed as a network of crisscrossing rainforest corridors that frame out a series of 1 to 3 acre lots. Each of these lots has a themed collection of fruit trees and exotic palms planted within them. That way the wildlife can pass through his property freely, and while he loses some quantity of food to these neighboring critters, they contribute to the health of the soil and therefore the trees in pretty beneficial ways. The key is just to plant more trees. His neighbor, Terry Lillian Newton, invites us to try and let go of our attachments to what we think the property should be and learn to appreciate its innate essence. Terry reminds us that if we want to have horses, plan for plenty of open space and a diversity of grasses, herbs, fruits, and flowers. Plant them all around the grazing areas or along the perimeters. She recommends learning more about this method in a book called Paddock Paradise by Jamie Jackson. Let's switch over now to the topic of building healthy soil. We'll start with Ed Bernhardt, the guy who refers to the Back to the Land movement as a silent revolution. Ed refers to himself as a deep ecologist who aims to live with the land rather than on it. Ed provides us with several great recipes for making valuable items like fast compost, his kombucha for the plants, a kitchen-made insecticide that's suitable for chewing insects, and even biosand water filter. We've made a PDF with these recipes outlined for you. You can find a link to it in the transcripts of this episode, as well as in the show notes of Ed's episode 002. Ed also reminds us to do what we can to recycle our waste. Shredding newspaper and food scraps into compost is a really great start. If you live in an urban environment, you can look into buying a compost drum or worm bin to make transforming your trash into treasure faster and tidier. Justin Dolan makes his bokashi microorganisms in his livestock corral and uses his animals to mix it. The process adds nutrients to the mix while creating beneficial bacteria that eat pathogens in the corral. Making bokashi in the animal corrals and spraying a tea version of it around the corral keeps it disinfected and smelling great. In Justin's bokashi production video, we also looked at his method of sustaining moisture and nutrients in the soil by creating biochar. He digs a big hole, about 2 to 3 meters wide and about a meter or so deep, and he fills it with wood waste. He ignites the wood, covers it with a dense layer of palm leaves and some sand on top, and he leaves it to smolder. He comes back the next day to remove the leaves, and he's left with a pit full of biochar, enough for the whole year. His extra touch comes when he removes the biochar. He fills the hole back up with wood to make a hugelkultur bed. Hugelkultur is this great method of mounting up wood logs and covering it with dirt. That dirt's planted on, and the wood underneath goes through a slow decomposition process, providing long-term fertilizer for your garden. Peter Kring mimics nature in the ways he applies mulch to his food forests. He mulches heavily around the drip lines of the trees, adding biochar and manure to the mulch. That way, the biochar-inoculated mulch bed slowly covers the area as each of the trees develops. Peter also adds microorganisms to the mix, but during wet times of the year. For more efficient use of your dripline applications, he recommends harvesting mulch from a nearby forest floor and hydrating it to extract the beneficial microorganisms before applying it. When taking harvest from our trees, he encourages us to put something back for the tree to continue to thrive. Find out what minerals each tree needs and create a schedule of application. It doesn't have to be a heavy fertilizing regimen. A bit of calcium carbonate or rock phosphate mixed with some manure and worm compost can be really effective. He recommends making it in large quantities and then adding your biomass, biochar, and microorganisms as needed throughout the year. For more information on biochar, Peter recommends checking out the documentary called The Secrets of El Dorado, Terra Preta. You can find it on YouTube. I got a link for it in the show notes. Esteban's businesses, Sembrando Flores and Biogas, focus primarily on soil improvement. Esteban has proven again and again that biodynamic preparation applications significantly improve commercial-scale coffee and wine production. In his practice of working with other landowners, he teaches those coming from a more conventional background who don't necessarily trust the organic methods yet to consider replacing a small percentage of their fertilizers with compost to start. That way they can measure the results and make decisions from there. He encourages us to grow our biomass precisely where we want to plant our gardens and trees in the coming year. He primarily uses plants like macuna and Mexican sunflower for this task. Plant it heavily where you want to plant and chop it back just before it goes to seed. This practice aligns with Esteban's approach of setting up conditions where the soil can feed itself. Healthy soil biology largely replaces the need for soil amendments. He recommends using small amounts of high-quality compost with high quantities of cheap biomass grown right there in the fields. Simply apply the compost tea on top of the chopped biomass, and you're good to go. His biogas installations provide multiple yields of gas and fertilizer in quantities that can allow you to apply an abundance of that tea weekly or even daily. In Nico's YouTube video, he uses the water from his tilapia ponds to drain directly into his biomass pile. That compost breaks down and is then moved to the gardens for top mulching. He also has hoses to inoculate his garden beds with the tilapia water. Nico shares the opinion of many of our guests of how building soil should be the #1 priority when starting a new project. And now onto the wonderful world of plants. My first guest, Susana Leff from Finca Amrita, is as passionately connected to her gardens as anyone I've met. Planting and processing harvest are some of her favorite tactics for helping her volunteers experience the magical qualities of life. In Finca Amrita's farm tour video, one of her volunteers describes how they grow their vanilla beans by gently helping each flower pollinate itself. It's so cool. Ed Bernhardt shared a valuable insight when he pointed out that many of the medicinal herbs often tolerate shade. Makes them great to plant near the house or even amidst tall trees. One of the most exciting things I've learned from Ed occurred when I went to his place a few years ago and he taught me how to propagate bamboo by cutting down a culm and creating several 1-meter long portions from the upper third of the cane. You cut each piece so that it has at least 4 nodes. In between each node, you cut a small square out of the side of the culm, big enough for the rainwater to get in. You plant the cane laying down lengthwise, half in the soil, and with the open windows exposed to the elements. As the culm fills with water and hydrates, it sends roots down at each of its nodes, as well as shoots that'll climb to the sky. It takes a little longer to get going than if you just dug out a more mature root from the side of a clump, but I'll tell you what, it requires way less effort. Besides the hemp and lana that Justin used for his blackwater remediation, he also recommends using Mexican sunflower. It's a plant that both he and Esteban use for green manure. Another one of his favorites to plant around is a bush called the miracle fruit, or the miracle berry. He says that it's an excellent food for people with diabetes. This miracle fruit removes your ability to taste the acidic qualities from the foods you eat afterwards. It's really cool. This results in sour foods like lemons and vinegar tasting sweet. It's a great way to satisfy a sweet tooth with non-sweet foods. I mean, seriously, you can even make like a pumpkin soup or something like that with no sugar, and it is just sweet and delicious. Justin likes to play with different plants to create microclimates for other plants and his living spaces. He often uses vining plants to cool down the walls of his house, and also uses them to create trellised windbreaks or dappled shade for more delicate foods that he plants outside. He encourages us to rearrange our perspective on what medicine is, or what it can be. He sets the example of planting herbs as a living first aid kit all around the outside of each of his homes. He also encourages us to plant things like neem, hombre grande, madero negro, garlic, and even chili to be used as ingredients for natural pest control. In some cases, it might even be worth importing some beneficial insects like praying mantis or ladybugs to eat more invasive species like ants and mites. Besides, who wouldn't love to see more praying mantises and ladybugs around, right? While he recommends that we remove weak and dying plants to keep insects away, he also reminds us that intentionally stressing plants can sometimes build resilience. Peter Kring is another master gardener who's turned out to be a treasure trove of tips. Most notably, he recommends that most fruiting trees should be pruned just after their fruiting cycles. You have to do your homework though. Some fruits like rambutan can be pruned back as much as 2 meters, while others like the mangosteen, they don't want to be pruned at all. Peter's nursery operation consists primarily of grafted durian, champadek, and other exotic fruits that produce better quality fruits faster when they're propagated as a graft. As he explains in his YouTube video on the topic, it can shave several years off the time you might have to wait for a tree to bear mature fruit. Another little tip that he gave us is that if you mix the variety of durian trees you plant in an area, they'll pollinate each other, and the diversity will increase your harvest seasons. I've seen similar things done with avocados. While, like me, Lynx Guimond may not necessarily be Sal Cargo's go-to plant management guy, the tour we took on his farm really blew me away. There are way more foods that can be planted near the beach than I ever imagined. For any properties that need to conserve water, he's demonstrated yet again that gray water filtration is a powerful way to water your garden in a nutrient-rich way. I'll leave you with one final tip that I've picked up from my own land management learnings. It's in alignment with the principle often described as value the marginal. While planting food has its obvious value and importance, don't skip on the pollinators. We need to plant pretty things. If not for ourselves and the aesthetic pleasure of our guests, we need a diversity of flowers in our garden to attract the ever-vigilant birds and bees that make our gardens an Eden. With that, my friends, I bid you a wonderful rest of your day. Remember to subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already, so you'll get notified when I eventually release our next episode on natural and sustainable construction methods. Until then, go find a seed and plant it somewhere lovely. Thanks for listening.